That's a very huge population. That's 2/3 of the country's population. There were these millions of daily wage workers stranded in major cities, away from their family, not having daily wages, dependent on handouts, and the situation was extremely tense. So about two weeks into the lockdown, our major cities were virtually at the verge of civil unrest. So the government preempted that, and as part of the 1.2 trillion rupees package that our Prime Minister announced, there were initially 144 billion rupees earmarked for SARS emergency cash, and it was subsequently increased to 200 billion, which is about $1.25 billion. The mandate that was given to us was to support 16.9 million families and to give them a subsistence allowance of $75 each to each family. And the thinking at that time was that hopefully this will tide them over a couple of months, and by then we would have controlled the disease spread. We were fortunate because over the last 1 year we had been actively focused on developing the digital backbone to run a massive SARS program. And there were 3 things in particular that we had developed over the last 1 year, which we brought into play during this period. One of them was a biometric payment system. We had started the procurement in January 2019, and in October 2019, it had come to fruition. We had brought on board 2 commercial banks, and the system that we had deployed was end-to-end biometrically enabled for payments. Now that was one asset that we had in our hand. The other one was a SMS-based request-seeking mechanism that we had, and we had conducted extensive exercises, war gaming exercises of how that would play out, how the SMS would hit our databases, what kind of messages would trigger, what would be the pros and cons. So all through last summer in 2019, we had been doing these blackboard exercises, war game exercises, practical exercises of this. And the third capability was actually a data analytics mechanism. As you know, Pakistan, every citizen has a unique identification number. That number is tied to our immigration database. It's tied to the Federal Bureau of Revenue. It's tied to your credit history. It's tied to your employment status, to your ownership of cars, and so on and so forth. And because in our database registration system, we can identify families and an individual belonging to a family, what we actually conceptualized was this mechanism of mass assistance, pulling a thread through all these 3 capabilities. And actually the data analytics mechanism we had tested last December as well, when we had exited 0.8 million people from Pakistan's existing social protection lists, which were completely non-deserving. So we pulled a thread through these 3 systems, and the idea was that we would adopt a hybrid targeting approach. We would combine emergency assistance for the known vulnerable, but we would open the system to demand-based support for the new poor. So we sought requests on an SMS shortcode. So all the cabinet members got together and widely advertised an SMS shortcode all over the country. So it was 8171. Everybody was asked to send their identity card numbers on 8171 if they needed assistance. And the entire cabinet, the entire government machinery got mobilized on the ground, widely disseminated this message. Once we received this huge repository of SMS messages, and we received 139 million SMSs during that window of period for which during which the window was open, and of those 66 million were unique. 66 million, that's a huge number. And then we employed data analytics to enable eligibility ascertainment using wealth proxies and existing survey data. And quite a sophisticated mechanism was developed of how those identity card numbers would hit different databases, how they would dip into the government's employment databases, pick the spouses from there, how it would go into the FBR database, how it would hit the immigration database, and according to predefined algorithms and protocols and approved policies which were approved at the board level, at the economic coordination subcommittee of the cabinet level, at the cabinet level, according to predetermined protocols and procedures. There were these messages that were triggered across a timeline to inform people whether they were eligible or whether they were ineligible. And then once we had this mass of individuals that we identified as eligible, we sent those identity card numbers to our partner banks. They did the Know Your Customer procedures on those, and then payment was authorized. And we actually had to make payments, we cascaded payments, and we took the National Command and Control Center fully on board. They would help us to convene the chief ministers and the chief secretaries and inform them about what was coming their way. So in each union council, we would send a certain number of SMS messages saying, okay, today is your turn to collect the payments. This is where you go. This is how you collect your payments. And this massive operation where we were able to give money to half the people in the country, half the people in this fifth largest country in the world, required this huge coordination. And this huge coordination was done during a very difficult period when the country was during a lockdown, when there was difficulty moving huge amounts of cash on the ground, when COVID-related precautions were a real challenge, so the long queues were a problem. And it was basically a whole of government effort that enabled this massive operation to come together. And a very courageous decision of the Prime Minister and of the Cabinet to let it go forward. And when we went into this, we knew that there were many challenges we were going to be faced with, and we continued to tackle these challenges as we went along. As the Chinese say, we were basically feeling the pebbles as we were crossing the river. So first week I went into the field, I found out that a lot of laborers, so every laborer that I saw that day had heard about 8171, each one of them. And I recall speaking to a laborers congregation, and half of them were absolutely silent. And I asked them, I said, why have you not SMS'd the government? And they said, well, we own mobile phones, but we don't know how to SMS. And that is when, I called up all the cabinet colleagues. I stood there and I sent out televised messages saying all volunteers have to come and help them SMS. Then we found out that a lot of them did not have credit on their phone. So we went to the ECC, we got approval for a waiver there. Then the retailers who were working with us told us, this is a very difficult environment. You're hurling us out of our houses. You're pulling us out of our houses. You have to waive off commission on the 42 rupees commission on the 100 rupee that the partner banks gave us. So on the go, we had to get the sales tax waived off. We had to get the advance income tax waived off. And there were permissions required from ECC and from the cabinet and from all the four provincial governments. It was a very, very complex task to turn around. Then we discovered that we were confronted with lots of cyber attacks of various sizes and shapes. So there were different agencies involved to exercise vigilance on that. There were issues related to biometric failures that we had to resolve with our partner banks. The first week when I was on radio responding to requests, there was a girl who called up and said, I have received a message that my father should receive money, but my father has actually died. And I had to explain to them that there are limitations of data-driven messaging. So if your father's death has not been registered in our database authority, I have no way of knowing that he has actually passed away. And if our algorithm tells us that he's the one who's eligible in your system, he will get the message. So this had to be all these limitations of the system, all these details about where to collect the money from, what does a KYC mean, how do you do a biometric, how do you line up in a... It was a massive, massive operation done for the first time, covering half the country in a context of extreme uncertainty. And it was an enormous privilege to be the face of it at that time. So in terms of what we've learned, I think that to the extent of my ministry, it's basically changed the way we will run government. It's made us more agile, more data-driven, more experimental, more ambitious, and that trend is on an upward trend. So I think that's the first thing that SARS Emergency Cash has done to us as a government. It's basically taught us that you can be ambitious, that the government can deliver, that the government can leverage these 21st century tools, that it is absolutely possible. If you have clean hands, it is absolutely possible to tell the masses that there will be problems as you go along, but that it is entirely possible to do things in a very new and novel way. So that's one thing that it's taught us. The second thing that it's taught us is that it's kind of offered us invaluable experience in delivering a massive national program in a context of complexity and uncertainty with speed. And thirdly, in terms of the lessons for other countries, basically wherever there are unique identification systems and pervasiveness of cell phone and internet connectivity, and the linkage of those unique identification systems with other databases, it tells us that it is possible to run large demand-based programs of that nature. So in terms of the way forward, SARS basically, and just to sidestep for a moment, SARS basically was this huge welfare program that the Prime Minister had conceptualized and that the Cabinet stood behind. This huge program of social welfare, which was by any standards the largest, for which special institutional arrangements were made. And in 15 months, we were not even able to structure it. We were able to roll it out, to put on ground various programs. So the success of SARS Emergency Cash is basically will help us to achieve that dream of a very large social safety net in the country. And I think that is the one thing that we are now focused on. And the policy discourse is ongoing within the government on what the scale, the breadth and depth of that post-COVID social protection program is going to be and how we're going to leverage cash transfers more broadly. Secondly, SARS Emergency Cash is also a stepping stone to a financial inclusion, which we regard as a very important component of poverty graduation. We feel that we are very uniquely positioned to push the needle on digital payments and to use this as a means of financial inclusion, especially with a very strong gender component. And currently we're working with the State Bank of Pakistan to push the needle on that very strongly. And of course, we're working with our Ministry of Foreign Affairs to share the lessons more broadly, and then to learn from other countries, because there are many components and many questions on which we could jumpstart in many areas by learning from other countries.
कोरोना वबा के दिनों में एहसास प्रोग्राम से आवाम को बहुत ज़्यादा रिलीफ दिया गया। हमारी कोशिश यही रही कि हम हर जगह पर पहुँचें, गरीबों की मदद करें, मुस्तहिक और हाजतमंदों की मदद करें, और हुकूमत इसमें पूरी तरह कामयाब रही। जी नाज़रीन, आप हमारे साथ रहे, आपका बहुत शुक्रिया।
फौरी खबर हो, राय या तज्जिए, डिजिटल दुनिया में आपके साथ साथ पीटीवी न्यूज की सोशल मीडिया प्लेटफॉर्म्स पर बढ़ती मकबूलियत, टॉक शोज, खसूसी रिपोर्ट्स और आगाही के पैगामात की फौरी रसानी के लिए पेश पीटीवी न्यूज ट्विटर अकाउंट पर 10 लाख फॉलोअर्स मुकम्मल। हम पर एतमाद करने और जुड़े रहने पर आपका शुक्रिया। पीटीवी न्यूज, दुरुस्त हर वक्त बर वक्त।
अवाम के वोट की ताकत ही अवामी नुमाइंदों को इक़्तिदार के ऐवानों तक पहुंचा सकती है और अवाम की खातिर